Good morning, everyone. The time is 9 a.m. I call to order the December 10th, 2020 meeting of the Contractors State Licensing Board to order. My name is David L. Torre, CSLB's board chair. I want to thank the board members for attending today's video teleconference board meeting. Board members, we're going to try to use our cameras during the meeting. To mitigate any potential bandwidth issues, we ask that you turn off your video camera when you are not speaking. When you would like to comment at any time throughout the meeting, please turn on your camera and select the raise your hand icon in the WebEx application. I will call on board members to speak. When called upon, please unmute yourself, and when finished, return to mute and turn off your camera. You will also need to click the raise your hand icon to lower your hand. Shelley Jones is our host and moderator today. While this is the first time Shelley is moderating CSLB's board meeting, she has moderated several board meetings for other boards throughout DCA. Welcome, Shelley. Also, joining us today, Registrar David Fote, Chief Deputy Registrar Tanya Corcoran, CSLB staff, and our board legal counsel, Jason Hurtado. Before we begin our regular agenda items, I want to touch on the closure of CSLB public offices, which includes closing headquarters and investigation center public counters and the 7 testing centers. As registrar, David Fote updated the board last Friday. CSLB and other state agencies closed offices to the public beginning on Monday, December 7th, pursuant to the governor's stay-at-home orders in response to the rise in COVID-19 cases. The office closures will last at least 3 weeks. Staff are busy notifying licensees, applicants, and consumers. Exam applicants with a test date during the closure have been notified, and their exams will be rescheduled. CSLB security officers will be on site at CSLB headquarters to accept official documents at the front entrance door. Additional steps staff took on Friday to prepare for the closure, including ensuring that only essential staff come in person to CSLB offices, posting signage at CSLB offices, updating the CSLB website, notifying licensed schools, issuing an industry bulletin, and providing office closure information on social media. While these are all challenging times, we must do our part to help slow the spread of COVID-19. With that said, let's begin. Feliz, please confirm board member attendance and roll call.
David Del Torre.
Here.
Kevin Albanese.
Here.
Frank Altamira.
Here.
Augie Beltran.
Here.
Ronnie Cobos.
Here.
Miguel Galarza.
Here.
Don Giartano.
Here.
Susan Granzilla.
Here.
Diana Love.
Here.
Michael Mark.
Here.
Marlo Richardson. Marlo.
I'm here.
Jimmy Wayne.
Here.
Johnny Simpson. Johnny.
This is the moderator. Johnny was with us in the attendee panel and was having some connectivity issues, so we're waiting for him to join us again.
Okay. Nancy Springer.
Here.
Mary Taggart.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Outstanding. At this time, I ask that you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There was an echo, so it kind of threw me off. Okay, we will begin with agenda item B, which is for public comment and to request agenda items for future meetings. The board values public input as part of our consumer protection mission. To allow us enough time to conduct our full schedule of business today, I'm limiting public comment to 3 minutes apiece. If your comments don't involve an item on today's agenda, this will be the time where you can make them. If you have comments on one of our agenda items, we encourage you to wait until we get to that item. We will give you an opportunity to make your comments at that time. There are a few other rules that apply. First, California law prohibits board members from discussing any matter brought up during public comment, and board members are not allowed to act on any item not on today's agenda. Second, if you want the board to discuss a topic not on the agenda, you can ask us to consider placing that issue on an agenda of a future meeting. Finally, if you have an application, complaint, or disciplinary charges pending before the board, we ask that you not discuss the details of your case or pending complaint. That's because board members may be the judges by law are not permitted to receive evidence or information that is not part of the administrative record in the case. Members of the public, if you are with us on WebEx and would like to make a comment, use the chat feature to send the host a note that you would like to offer public comment. If you are joining us on the phone and would like to make a public comment, press *9. We will make any WebEx comments first, followed by the telephone comments. We will use the same system throughout the meeting for public comment during each agenda item. You will find instructions on how you can make public comments on the agenda for this meeting posted on our CSLB website. Board members, please turn on your camera and raise your hand if you have an agenda item you would like placed on a future agenda meeting. Okay, I see none. Shelley, please check to see if there are any members of the public who wish to address the board or offer a possible agenda item for a future meeting.
At this time, I see no requests.
Thank you. Next is agenda item C, presentation of certificates of recognition. Today, we are recognizing 2 staff, Amanda Martinez, Enforcement Peace Officer, Special Investigator, and Jane Cradler. I hope I pronounced that right. Former analyst with the Public Affairs Office. I will start with reading the certificate of recognition for Amanda. In recognition of your hard work on the Caramonte construction investigation, which resulted in dozens of felony counts being filed. This complex case involved preparing and serving 4 search warrants, reviewing thousands of documents, interviewing multiple victims, and compiling an extensive report. And while working this case, you also completed several other investigations that resulted in criminal filings. Your collaboration with local law enforcement and service and dedication to consumer protection reflect the best of CSLB.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any comments at this time?
How do I raise my hand? I'd like to thank.
Recognizes Albanese.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Amanda, thank you so much for what you do. So often our peace officers go without recognition. They're out there working and diligently working, and they're not in the highlights. And the opportunity to recognize you is appreciated. So thank you for doing this, David. Just a bit about Amanda. Prior to working for CSLB, she had served as a peace officer for the Alcohol Beverage Control, where she developed these effective investigation strategies and strong law enforcement partnerships. Obviously, partnerships that you were able to leverage with the most recent case David talked about. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Amanda's developed very strong working relationships with Napa and Sonoma County District Attorneys, which is also very beneficial in protecting wildfire survivors. So huge thanks to Amanda for sharing your knowledge with other CSLB staff, taking on the more complex criminal cases. Our consumers and the construction industry benefit for your work in addressing these unscrupulous persons operating in the industry, and we thank you very much for what you've done. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the recognition.
Thank you, Kevin.
I would also, is there any other comments? Well, I like to echo Kevin's comments and add that Amanda's work with our executive office staff and the union representing CSLB investigators to convert from the enforcement representative series to special investigators was effective and appreciated. Amanda's diligence and drive to investigate criminal matters and working with law enforcement to develop and serve subpoenas and coordinate criminal investigations is impressive. Thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, I will now read the certificate of recognition for Jane. In recognition of your 9 years of dedicated work to advance CSLB's mission of consumer protection, your deep commitment to serving vulnerable seniors, in particular, led to the expansion of CSLB's Senior Scam Stoppers into a robust outreach program that provides valuable information to the public and builds essential partnerships with other state agencies and legislators. Your tireless advocacy made a real difference. We wish you all the best as you embark on new adventures as the administrating manager of Board of Architects. Thank you, Jane, and I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Any board members, do you have any comments? Reminder to turn your camera and raise your hand. Albanese.
Yeah, Jane, I just wanted to say I've had the opportunity, I think maybe half a dozen of your senior scam stoppers, and they were fantastic. The way that you get the legislators, to these scam stoppers, and you engage the consumers the most vulnerable. It's going to be missed. Very much appreciated, and I wish you nothing but the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other board member care to comment? See none. With that, Shelley, is there any public comment for this agenda item?
I see none at this time.
Thank you. Next, we begin the executive update. We start with agenda item D1, the review of the September 9th, 2020 board meeting minutes, followed by the review of the November 4th, 2020 committee meeting minutes.
Chair, I move to approve.
So there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll make a
Second.
second.
Okay, is there any board member comment? Shelley, any public comment?
Seeing none at this time.
Okay, Felice, roll call, please.
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Yes.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Ronnie Cobos,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzilla,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Michael Mark,
I will abstain. I wasn't a board member, but I did read the minutes.
okay. Marla Richardson,
Aye.
Jimmy Wayne,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Yes.
Mary Taggart.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Felice. Next is the November 4th, 2020 Executive Licensing, Legislative, Enforcement, and Public Affairs Committee Summary Reports, which begin on page 27 of your board packet.
Chair,
Board
motion to
member.
approve.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Jimmer Wayne, second.
Okay, is there any board comment? Okay, seeing none. Shelley, is there any public comment?
Seeing none at this time.
Felice, roll call, please.
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Yes.
Maggie Beltran,
Aye.
Ronnie Cobos,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giudatano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Michael Mark,
Yes.
Marla Richardson,
Yes.
Jim Wayne,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Yes.
Mary Taggart.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Felice. Next is agenda item D2, the registrar's report. For this, I turn it over to David Folt. Mr. Folt, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Delatorre. In regards to the board meeting schedule, we are going to survey all of you regarding your availability for a board meeting around the middle of March. There may be a need to have committee meetings, but we will leave that up to the committee chairs to let us know if they need to meet before the March board meeting. So I don't know if there's any questions regarding the board meeting schedule. If not, I'd like to, sorry.
Board members, are there any comments? Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to provide an update on the contracting of a consultant to study the battery energy storage system classification. And you'll find the update on it begins on page 59 of your packet. As we've previously reported, the Department of Consumer Affairs issued an intent to award the contract to the University of Berkeley, and that occurred back in September. The University of Berkeley reviewed our study that's on our website, and as many of you know, it's an 84-page study with over 1,000 pages of documentation and background information. And because there's a lot to review, they need to review the study that we did as well as interview other stakeholders. They've asked for 6 months to complete their study. Initially, we had advised you that 4 months we thought would be sufficient, but they have asked for 6 months. We've approved that. We anticipate they're going to begin in January of 2021. Now, as I think you're aware, this study is of interest to a lot of different parties, and we are routinely asked questions about what could happen. And that's why we included in the packet a timeline for the regulatory rulemaking process. And I want to just touch on that for just a moment. We have no idea what UC Berkeley will recommend. They may recommend that rulemaking be pursued to enact a new regulation or to amend a regulation, but we don't know that. There's lots of other recommendations that they could bring forward. So I just want to be clear that in no way are we trying to, as staff, influence what they may recommend. And when they do make a recommendation, you as board members have the final authority to decide whether you want to adopt their regulation or you want to pursue some other type of remedy, or perhaps the current way we're allowing classifications to perform this work should continue. But that will be ultimately your decision. We have a timeline, and I did speak with Jason Hurtado. As you know, he's your board counsel. I spoke with Jason this morning, and he expressed some concern that the timeline is too lengthy. You would have this process taking perhaps 3 years. Jason mentioned that should the regulatory rulemaking process be something that the board would want to do, it could be completed within 1.5 years to 2 years. But again, this was included only for informational purposes. What we're planning to do is to let UC Berkeley perform their study. I have asked that the Department of Consumer Affairs provide the standard methodology that's used in preparing these reports. And from the staff perspective here at the CSLB, we're going to provide any support information that UC Berkeley requests, but it's going to be, their study, and they're going to be performing that independent of CSLB staff. So I don't know if there's any questions about that, but I just wanted to clarify that you as board members have the authority to decide what, if anything, you want to do in regards to the appropriate classification to install a battery energy storage system. I welcome any questions or comments.
Board members, are there any comments? Okay, seeing none. Is that it for your report, Dave?
Yes, that would be my report.
Thank you for that. Shelley, are there any public comments out there?
We only have one question. One attendee is asking if the tentative board meeting schedule is in the meeting packet.
No, it is not, because we have not surveyed our board members regarding their availability for March. But as soon as I would ask that Felice Jones would survey the board members next week. And at that time, we'll be able to publicly put on our website the date for the next board meeting.
And that was all the questions we had at this time.
Great, thank you, Shelley. So the registrar's report was informational only. There was no action required on that. Next is the agenda item D3, the review of the board member administrative procedural manual. You can find the manual beginning on page 67 of your packet. Proposed revisions are noted as underlined to incorporate new language and as a strikeout to remove language. The proposed edits are intended to provide clarity on current board policy. Since the executive committee reviewed the manual on the November 4th, 2020 committee meeting, there were a few additional minor edits made, which I will cover. The reference to an enforcement representative has been replaced with the current classification title, which is special investigator. The other edit is the acronym for California Department of Insurance, which has been changed to CDI. I wanted to briefly address one proposed revision on the top of page 93, which is contact with parties to a complaint or investigation. It is our current practice that Registrar Foat take the lead to respond and address these matters. The goal is to respond within 24 hours of receipt of any inquiry or request sent to board members. Registrar Foat and Chief Deputy Registrar Corcoran will confirm a response is provided on board members' behalf and provide a copy of any correspondence received and addressed to board members along with a copy of the response. Board members, do you have any comments at this time?
Motion to approve as submitted.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Again, I ask, is there any final comments by the board?
I just have a comment as a new member of this board. This procedures has been very, very helpful to me, the 2018 version, and moving forward, the changes look correct.
Okay, can you speak up closer to the speaker? We can barely hear you, or at least I can. So,
is that better? This is Michael Mark that made that comment.
Okay, thank you for your comment. All right. Okay, Shelley, any public comment?
Seeing none at this time.
Elise, roll call, please.
David Delacari,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Yes.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Rodney Gobos,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Michael Mark,
Yes.
Marla Richardson,
Yes.
Jim Wayne,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson, Johnny,
Aye. Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Yes.
Mary Taggart.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Felice. Moving on to agenda item D4, the budget update, which begins on page 101. Stacy Paul, Budget Manager, will provide the board an overview of our current budget, including revenue and expenditures. As we have discussed at prior board meetings, the board approved reduction plan of 7.1 million remains critical in keeping our fund solvent this fiscal year. Stacy, please provide the board an update.
Thank you, Board Chair, and good morning, everyone. On page 101 begins your budget update. The first chart shows the fiscal year 2021 budget and expenses for the first quarter. No big surprises. In fact, we're cutting costs, as David mentioned, whenever possible to meet our goal of reducing the expenses that were approved by the board. As you can see, we've expended roughly 24% of our budget authority, keeping us on track to spend about the same as we spent last year at $66 million on board expenses. If we flip the page, the first chart shows our revenue for the first quarter. You can see that overall, we are up from prior year by 16.8%. This is mostly due to the emergency fee increase of $50 on the renewals that was implemented back in February 2020. The next chart directly below is our fund condition. This projects out to 21-22. If you look at current year, which is the middle column, you can see that we had a beginning balance of 3.8 million. Our projected revenue for this year is 72 million, and directly below that is our projected expenses and mandatory costs at 72 million, which accounts for the 7.1 million reduction that we already spoke about. This should end the fiscal year exactly how we started at around 3.8 million, keeping our fund flat. In the same chart, if you look at the final column, projected budget year 21-22, you can see a similar scenario to this year. However, it doesn't account for the 7.1 million in expenses or a possible fee increase. This really highlights if nothing is done to our fund, it will be depleted to basically zero, leaving us insolvent starting in fiscal year 22-23. Moving on to page 103, this is our Construction Management Education Fund, where we issue $100,000 in grants annually to schools. As you can see, we've been seeing a steady increase in donations being made to this account. If this trend continues, this fund should be able to continue dispersing grants for many years. If you flip to the next page, the board's approved 7.1 million in expenditure reductions for this fiscal year that I referred to in the previous charts. The column on the right shows in blue reflects the savings in each area that have been identified in the first quarter. As you can see, overall, we have saved 2.5 million already this year. And if we stay on track, we'll definitely meet the 7.1 goal and possibly exceed it. Lastly, let me quickly touch on the statistical summary details on the next 2 pages. As you can see, over the last 4 months, we are seeing a decline in new licenses and applications. This is mainly due to the pandemic and the shutdown of exam administration over at least a few months. During this time, renewals have stayed steady though and consistent, and in fact, we are seeing an 8% increase over 2 years ago. This concludes the budget update. Are there any questions?
Any board comments, questions? Okay,
This is-
seeing.
This is Susan, and I wanted to add, thank you very much, Stacy, since we've been working on this, and it is linked to the next subject we'll be going over. So thank you for that background for the next presentation.
No problem. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, Susan, thank you for that comment. Any public comment? Shelley?
This is the moderator. We did receive a request for comment from Gilbert Collins. He's asking if there is a listing of the grants to schools.
Our licensing, this is processed under our licensing section, but we can Justin, I don't know if you want to address that.
Yeah, I'll find the page number real fast.
Okay, thanks.
My apologies, everyone. One moment. You can see the proposed awards the board will be considering later today on page 290. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Justin.
Well, thank you for the report, Stacy. And that was informational, no actions required. Moving on, agenda item D5, the presentation from Cooperative Personnel Services, HR Consulting, or CPS, on their fee audit study. The update and summary begins on page 109 of your packet and is followed by the study. The study lays out the recommendations to maintain sufficient funding over the next 5 years. Before we begin the presentation, I want to provide a bit of a background. Over the past year and a half, we have been discussing at every board meeting our budget and the need for long-term solutions to balance expenditures with revenue. On September 2019, the board approved seeking emergency regulations to raise renewal fees and directed staff to hire a consultant to complete a comprehensive fee study with recommendations for long-term financial stability. On December of 2019, the board received approval by the Office of Administrative Law to raise renewal fees under existing statutory authority by $50. We began collecting the fees effective February 2020. On September 9th, 2020, the board took additional measures to reduce expenditures and approved a $7.1 million expenditure reduction plan so we could remain solvent through the remainder of this fiscal year. At this time, the board will need to either consider increasing fees or make sufficient permanent cuts to our expenditures. CPS HR Consulting is here today to share their comprehensive plan, which takes into account the mitigating steps the board has taken to date and provides recommendations for long-term fund stability. As board chair, I appointed Vice Chair Susan Granzella and Board Secretary Mary Teichert as a two-person advisory committee to review the fee study. On October 16, 2020, Susan and Mary met with CPS representative and CSLB staff to review and discuss the study. At the November 4th, 2020 committee meeting, Susan and Mary provided an overview to the executive committee. The executive committee recommended CPS represent the study to the full board today. I appreciate the work Mary and Susan and staff have done. I will now turn it over to Chris Atkinson, Senior Consultant with CPS HR Consulting, to present the study and recommendations to the board. Chris, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, David. Happy to be here with everyone this morning. My name is Chris Atkinson. I was the project manager for this engagement. I'll just start with a couple quick introductions. I have myself on the line and then also Paula North. My background's in workload studies, fee studies. We've done a couple similar studies to this study with other boards at DCA. And so I'd also like to introduce Paula, if you're able to unmute yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Paula North, and I've been with CPS HR for about 12 years, working on organizational assessments, including a number of these fee studies, as Chris mentioned. And my primary role in this one was data compilation and analysis. And we just want to thank you for your time this morning as we present our results.
All right, thanks, Paula. So just a quick 2 seconds on CPS HR Consulting. We're an HR consulting and management firm. We're a joint powers government authority. We only work with government and nonprofit agencies. We've been in business since 1985, and we focus on a variety of different HR and management related topics. So in terms of what we'll be discussing today, I'll give you a little bit of background of the objectives and the background of the study. We'll dive into a little bit of the story in terms of historical revenue and expenses, as well as projections into the future. Then we'll talk a little bit about the mechanics in terms of how did we actually arrive at these recommended fee amounts. We'll then just briefly review the recommended fee levels that were in the agenda packet. And then we'll talk about the overall impact of these recommended fee levels on the fund condition for CSLB. Next slide, please. Great. So despite fee increases in 2011, 2017, and 2019, most recently, CSLB's fund has been still maintained a structural imbalance since FY 13-14. So where expenditures have exceeded revenue since that time, essentially. We'll talk a little bit about why. The majority of these increases really are primarily outside of the CSLB's control, and we'll dive into a little bit of the reasons behind that, like I mentioned. So recently, the CSLB contracted with us to really look at their overall fee structure and determine a fair and justified ways for charging applicants different fee amounts based really on the workload associated with performing those fees to where the fund would maintain a healthy balance for the next 3 to 5 years. Next slide. Great. So, and just a caveat too, the next couple slides I'm going to be going over in terms of the financials were a snapshot in time as of June 2020. Later in the presentation, in terms of what we actually costed the fees on, in terms of the recommended fee levels, was based upon updated financial projections as of September 2020. The story in terms of historical and projections is relatively similar between these 2 points in time. So this graph really looks at what the historical expenses and revenues were, as well as projecting into the future here. So the top line there is expenditures in the past and going into the future. So if we look at that burgundy line there, and this is in thousands of dollars, so that first line in FY 13-14 is 57.6 million, increased gradually to in 1920, 72.8 million. And will continue to increase to 90 million in FY 25-26 if a fee increase is not instituted. And looking at that time period between FY 2021 to 25-26 is about a 24% increase annualized compared to the revenues from projecting into the future at FY 19-20 at 69 million to 74 million. Is only about a 7% increase. So expenditures are almost outpacing revenues into the future at about a 3-to-1 rate. So there's definitely a clear need there for a fee increase overall. Next slide, please. So this slide looks at a little bit more granular level, the expenditures for the board from FY 16-17 all the way to FY 25-26 across the board's 4 main budget categories. So starting at the top there, that burgundy line, personnel services is expenses related to employee salary and benefits. In FY 16-17 was 34 million. It's grown to just shy of 45 million in 2021. That cost will continue to increase annualized about 3% every year, all the way out to 25-26 to end at 52 million projected. Again, if no fee increase is instituted. Going down to the next line in green there, the total operating equipment and expenditures that aren't enforcement related actually saw a slight decline from FY 16-17 to 2021, ending at 18.3 million. That cost is projected to increase to 19.3 million in FY 25-26, which is about a 1% annualized rate. The next goldenrod line there is total external enforcements. So this line has to do with external costs such as Attorney General's Office, Office of Administrative Hearings. These are the 2 biggest line items in that category. In FY 16-17 was 6.6 million to 2021 grew to 11 million, and that will continue to increase to FY 25-26 of 14 million. And that's about a 5% annualized year-over-year increase out to 25-26. And then the last item down there has to do with direct assessments. So this is primarily the board's payment into the statewide pro rata expenses for centralized services like the Department of Finance, CalHR, et cetera. That has gone from 3 million in 16-17 to 5.5 million in 2021, and is relatively flatlined into the future there to 25-26. And a lot of the reasons really behind these increases that are outside of CSLB's control have to do with salary increases. So for personnel services there, that's primarily related to increases in salary and benefits associated with those employees. For total enforcement expenses there in that goldenrod line, that has to do with increased in salaries for these individuals in the Attorney General's and Office of Administrative Hearings. That cost then gets passed down back to the board. So that's a lot of in terms of just the big picture, what's really happening here. Next slide, please. So this slide, what I really want to draw your attention to, a lot of this information I've reviewed in the last couple slides, but most importantly, kind of from a bottom line standpoint, if you take a look at the bottom two rows there, the fund balance in the month in reserve, what you will notice, again, this is without a fee increase, is that as of June 2020, the board would have achieved a negative fund balance beginning in 2021, and that would have basically continued all the way into the future there. So starting at 0.1 negative months in reserves and just continuing to grow. So just another snapshot in terms of why a fee increase is needed. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to get a little bit into the mechanics of how we arrived at the recommended fee amounts. So step one there, the funding gap analysis had to do with identifying the total needed revenue to offset the expenses as well as build a healthy 4 to 5 month reserve. So in that 4 to 5 month, the number comes from the fact that there's a legal maximum of a 6 month reserve that the board can have in statute. And so in working with CSLB staff, we felt that a 4 to 5 month reserve would be a healthy amount of money to maintain the financial stability of the fund there. So that's what we were really targeting at in terms of identifying the amount of fee increase that was needed there. So then step two, work time allocation analysis. So this step has to do with tying the work of the staff at the Contractor State License Board to the fee amounts. And so really this was a time study that was trying to capture the amount of time associated with different fee types. So the first piece in that was development of a standardized task list where we captured work activities from licensing, enforcement, and exams, created a large list of different tasks that would capture that entire unit. So just as a quick example, one task was around original contractors application. So we captured in several sentences the work that licensing performs to process that original contractor's application. There were other tasks around enforcement, such as for complaints. So it described all the work activity associated with performing complaints for the enforcement unit. We also made sure to incorporate the administrative time. So individuals that were not working directly in licensing enforcement and testing, their time was captured and redistributed as well into this study, but they weren't technically part of logging their time in this study. So what we did then when we had all the licensing enforcement and exam tasks is we had the frontline level supervisors complete the percentage of time each of their staff members spends on average across a year in each of these task categories. We then went through a review process where the second level manager reviewed that time allocation, and then finally a third level review where the division chiefs signed off, made any modifications as necessary. So the next piece of this was looking at workload quantification. And so there we're really talking about, as they're often referred to at your board meetings, just the workload statistics. So number of original contractor applications, number of complaints, et cetera. And that was an important input into this methodology because we used the work allocation data that I described, along with these workload outputs to also help arrive at an estimated time per task. And I'll jump into an example about what that is in the next slide, please. Great. So one of the key aims with this study, and as you'll see in the revised fee structure here, was really to get an understanding of how much time is spent on activities associated with what we call sole owner versus non-sole owner license types, and to justify different fee amounts for those two business entity types. So I'll just quickly define sole versus non-sole owner. So sole owner are contractors that are your typical sole proprietorship, individual business owner. Contrast that with the non-sole owner business entity types, which is basically everything except the sole owner. So joint ventures, partnerships, LLCs, etc. basically. And so what this table looks at is just a snapshot of how some of these, how it takes essentially longer to process non-sole owner activities compared to sole owner activities.